Welcome to Three Witches and a Druid podcast, a Canadian podcast about paganism in today's modern society.
Hello again, and welcome back to Three Witches and a Druid, where we sit around in the Zoom meeting and talk about modern paganism and our experiences with that. I am Margot.
And I'm Gwen.
Maeve.
And I'm Brian.
This episode, we've actually been asked to discuss our experiences or associations with being pagan and feeling marginalized because of that. Have we had any experiences where we have felt that our disclosure of being pagan has affected us negatively? And then beyond that, how has that affected us within the healthcare system as well here in Atlantic Canada?
This was presented to Gwen, I guess.
Yeah, I was asked to give a bit of a presentation on the Pagan Experience sort of thing. This is for students getting a certified spiritual care practitioner qualification. And they're to acquire knowledge of world religions, spiritualities, cultural traditions through experiential and conceptual learning. So in other words, get out and get your hands dirty as well as read some books, and to develop some cultural humility and competency through learning about cultural safety, human rights, that sort of thing. People don't realize this, but often religions are on the forefront of these social justice type things. So they've picked up this point in history and realizing that people are really concerned about marginalization and they're wanting to incorporate that. And I think it's really wonderful to be asked to speak about our experience as pagan, being non-majority faith group, how that has affected us within the society. And then when we interact with government, and specifically for these spiritual care practitioners within healthcare. So they did have some suggested questions, and I'm really curious to hear what other people's experiences are, or if you have some stories from friends or family. One of the things they were wondering on the general basis is, what are some of the most common misunderstandings of pagan beliefs and practices in Atlantic Canada? Without even putting any thought into it, it's the satanic thing.
Yeah, that's always
right.
That was the first story I thought of, was when you were the property manager here. Somehow it got discussed in the office after one of the maintenance folks had been into my apartment. Somebody mentioned that I was a Satan worshiper.
That's right. I'd forgotten that story.
And your response was, have you looked in her apartment? What do you think she worships?
Yeah. Not a Satan in sight.
Just mermaids everywhere.
Just mermaids, yeah.
The unfortunate thing is a lot of pop culture does that, and it still happens today.
Yeah.
There's a TV show, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, on Netflix, and it's from a pagan point of view. It's really frustrating because they're witches and they worship Satan. None of it makes any sense. Like, Satan is very much it's a Christian deity. It has nothing to do with paganism. It has nothing to do with witchcraft.
It's frustrating. And it's even less to do with Druidism.
Oh, yeah.
We have such a huge umbrella of traditions, and that one sort of idea just gets overlaid on everything. Some archetypal Pan or Hern and Kernanos, some sort of horned god figure ends up on somebody's altar. It's all of a sudden, an idea that we're all Satanists. And I mean, there is this tradition of those grimoire-based witchcraft traditions in Britain that have percolated through the societies at the turn of the century and that sort of thing. And they were the chaos magicians and mystic societies and that sort of thing. And they maybe played with that, the Christian world construct and the idea of demons and hierarchies of angels and all that sort of thing. But to overlay that on an entire family of pagans is unfair. And it's simplistic even to apply it to Golden Dawn people or whatever, to just say out now that they're Satanists. It's super simplistic and narrow viewed, but to have to go through that conversation
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
I've kind of given up having those conversations. For years you're explaining yourself and explaining yourself and explaining yourself. And now it's people like, what? And I'm like, yeah, we're just kind of a based religion and leave it alone, because a lot of it too, that the whole you're a childish flake.
Mm,
It's like I've gotten to the point where you think what you want. My child is now old enough that I don't have to worry about little kids not being allowed over to my house anymore.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
of what people think. I mean, if someone asks me about it, I will certainly explain anything and everything. I'll sit with them, whatever they want to know.
Hmm.
But if people are criticizing, I do not feel the urge to defend myself anymore.
Yeah.
That's just where I am in life. But it is very much the whole you're a flaky, hippie, not grounded in reality kind of person. I think you get that a lot of the time. You're just some kind of weirdo.
Yeah. And I'll maybe apply, the concept of magic and that living in an enchanted world where there are land spirits and there are, like that sort of whole part of the cosmology that probably in one form or another, to some degree or another, covers 99% of the pagan traditions. If they don't believe in this, they still have an element of that. But the minute that comes out in a conversation, you're considered unsophisticated or stupid, or, don't you know that that's just story, or all these sorts of things. And you're thinking to yourself, have you read anything about quantum entanglement? Do you understand that we're not in a three-dimensional world and all these sorts of things? But I'm the dummy, right? But I'm the dummy because I think consciousness is fundamental and is not attached to my body, but can exist beyond the manifest world. But you cannot explain to somebody if they don't understand it. They're not curious about the world. They're accepting of materialist worldview. They're accepting of the fact that if you see it and touch it, that's all that exists. There's nothing else you can do. That's the end of the conversation, right? Okay, I'm a dummy. You just have to go, okay, that's my thought on it. But I don't know. How does somebody else navigate that?
Or a little bit, you know what? Why don't you go look up animism and some quantum physics and
Well,
why? Unless someone wants to know the details, I don't even defend myself anymore.
yeah. Now, a question that they gave me that comes out of that, because I think we kind of covered the main points, I feel, is how have you and others who you know experienced prejudice, bias, or the impact of mainstream privilege? So have you felt sidelined because of this? For the most part, and we've talked about this before, even when you say, I don't hide what I am anymore, or I don't make excuses or apologies anymore, but sometimes you just go along to get along, I guess. Has anybody had any real prejudice, bias, or impact of mainstream privilege that's affected you?
So personally, we're very open about being pagan. So I'd say that we haven't experienced any of that, but we know lots of people in the community who have had child services called on them, a lot of questioning of people's abilities to raise children or form a family based on their quotation mark Satan worship. But personally, it hasn't happened to us. Actually, our Grove is very lucky in the sense that we have members in the military who have pushed for equal rights on cenotaphs and such, as well as we have a member of the Grove who's adopted and was very open about their paganism, all through the adoption.
That's wonderful.
Very nice, yeah.
And everything went swimmingly. I 100% believe prejudice and bias exists, but I feel that we're also moving in the right direction.
Oh, I agree with you, Brian. I agree. And even this being asked to participate in this has been a wonderful, eye-opening experience to me that somebody even cares. Somebody even cares to maybe adjust how they provide services to people, right? I tend to agree with you. Now, one of the things they were wondering is, especially within healthcare, how are illness, disability, and death understood from the perspective of paganism? The one thing I thought of is, and I would say that's primarily fundamental Christians, and I, again, don't like to speak for other religions, but there seems to be this idea that the root of all suffering is Satan, right? And since we don't have a Satan, we have to dig a little deeper for what causes suffering in the world. Where does undeserved illness or disability, what do we feel about death? So
one thing from the monotheist traditions is a lot of them view existence here on earth is a form of suffering. They're all about moving on to heaven or nirvana or to a better place, Where here, for pagans, this is it. You're living as close to the goddess as you can. Like Earth is our goddess. So we don't view our normal existence as suffering, other than, of course, paying taxes and being poor on the rare occasion. But like our existence is, in a sense, our heaven. And I don't speak for everybody, of course, but a lot of pagans don't view existence as suffering, where a lot of other spiritual paths do, which is a big difference between us and others. But in Druidry, we're big believers that you exist here on a material plane, you eventually move into the other world, the spiritual world, and then you enter into the infinium, kind of to be recycled back into the material plane and be reborn or reincarnated or whatnot.
There is the classical pagan idea that everything that happens to us is part of our journey, and as horrible as it may be, and I have railed against it very seriously myself, it's part of your journey. It's part of the lessons you need to learn in this life. And, eventually you will go on to the next life. And this is all just part of your journey through many lives in the cosmos, I suppose. I've had to accept that just sometimes shitty things happen to good people.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. There's no one making it happen. Now, there are people who believe that if you did unpleasant things in a previous life, you are going to get your karma in this one.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're like, what did I do in the last life to deserve this kind of idea? It just depends on how you wish to view it, because there is a little bit of that with some people.
Yeah.
It's just part of the journey.
But it is still based on sort of personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
What you put out, you get back.
And personal accountability. It's not, as Brian said or Gwen said, it's not some outside entity punishing us for our actions or making us suffer to prove that we're good enough to enter heaven or.
Yeah, just having this conversation, I recall, because, I live in pop culture. A few years back, I watched this British series called The Midwife, set in post-World War II Britain. And she's a nurse but she lives alongside an abbey or something but she's interacting with this religious female order. And the conversation comes up about why is there suffering? The Mother Superior, or whatever the title of the leader of the abbey, to me, she gave a very pagan response. And she said, God is not in the suffering. God is not in the event. God is in our response to the event. And I think that's a very pagan outlook to me, in that we don't blame Satan or anything else, and we don't have this idea of predestination and all those sorts of things, that things, you have to suffer, you're bound to suffer. This illness is a result of suffering imposed on you. Things happen in a natural world. Things are happening all the time. Where deity comes into it, where our spiritual path comes into it, is how we respond to that. It's that personal responsibility thing.
The deity is not causing it, but your faith will help you get through it.
Yeah.
Faith will help you get through it.
We'll get through it. So, Brian, you kind of mentioned, and that's my understanding of Druidry as a non-Grove member and all that sort of thing, is that there's a possible chance at reincarnation. There's another world, an immaterial world, where there is growth or whatever that can happen, and consciousness continues to exist, and then may possibly choose to reincarnate. Again, not right across the board, but reincarnation in some form is a very pagan.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a Druid tenet, but the vast majority of Druids I know, that's what they believe.
Right.
Like I said, it's almost like a giant recycling machine.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
It's a terrible way to put it, but if you boil it down.
Stardust.
Yeah.
Everything's stardust.
Yeah, exactly. We go back to it and come from it. Yeah.
I remember one time being grilled really hard by somebody. I don't know if they were trying to bait me or whether they were seriously trying to understand, but being really grilled about the idea of reincarnation and what pagan belief systems were overall. And I finally just said to them, look, in the end, it does not matter what I believe. What I believe is not going to change what happens to me after I die. So I don't need to explain to you or justify myself to you and make you understand where I'm coming from if I'm not even sure what that answer is.
Yeah.
I personally don't feel I need to know what that answer is because it's not going to change what happens.
Right.
Yeah. I think in the past, a lot of bigger, more institutional style religions, it was a control method, like, the worry about the afterlife,
Oh, for sure.
Oh, hell and purgatory.
Pagan ethics are based on be a good person.
Yes.
Not an or else. The afterlife might be fun. It might be a recycling plant where I decide to come back. It might be the Summerland. But as a whole, we're not living for the next life. We're living our best selves now. And we don't mean our best selves by Studio 54 or whatever. We're meaning our best selves. We're trying to.
Yeah.
Now you just totally aged yourself there.
Whoops.
How many of our listeners are going to know what that means?
Studio 89 now, or 88, or however old I am, right?
And it was a way, I suppose, to explain away, the human condition and the human suffering that took place for thousands of years. Because life is still hard, but it's not as hard as it used to be.
It was, yes.
You're suffering, but you be meek and mild and do all this and trust in God, and you're going to get to go to heaven and just live a beautiful life after this.
Yeah.
I think it was also a selling point.
Yeah.
Come join us. And this is what you'll get when you're finished.
We guarantee this.
Yeah, we guarantee this. You have to try to live a good life now because there are some fields of thought that say if you did not learn what you were supposed to in this life, you are going to have to repeat it in the next until you get it right.
Yeah.
So there's that idea too, but just be nice for the love of Pete.
For the love of Pete, just be a good person.
Love of Pete.
Just be nice. Don't be a dick. Don't be a
yes.
dick.
I was going to use fouler language, but we are on a podcast.
That's
For
okay.
the love of Pete, just be friggin' nice.
So I've got a couple more questions, specifically healthcare related. What are some of the things that may contribute to feelings of exclusion or a lack of cultural safety within healthcare settings for pagan individuals and or families?
Well, right off the bat, a lot of people may feel that if they inform anyone that they are pagan, that they may run into a doctor, a nurse, or a practitioner, which may feel an extreme religious side to it, where they may, I'd say, convert or maybe not care for the individual quite as much. Now, of course, a lot of that would be protected under Hippocratic Oath, and I don't think anyone would be that kind of evil, but history has shown us otherwise.
I can confirm my husband's in the hospital right now as a part of an ongoing chronic thing, but 2016, when he had his crisis event, I'm on a podcast, I do this for work, and I try and, like so many people, not make religion my only point of contact in the outside world, but I am out there. So I'm not really ashamed to be out there or whatever, but he was in a critical position. I was in a vulnerable spot. He couldn't speak for himself. He couldn't advocate for himself. And when they're asking me questions to get him admitted,
you probably second guessed a lot at first.
And I'm grateful that I have so many spiritual connections, but there are solitary pagans that don't have the spiritual community that can come in or be supportive of me outside of the hospital. But you're in a vulnerable spot. You're terrified for your family member or yourself or your health. And you think, can I cope? I have had nothing but absolute professionalism from the people that I have dealt with Dave's care. And yet my first thing was to protect myself from any kind of retaliation because I wasn't mainstream.
Right.
That was not even a second in my head that I went through all of that and said, oh no, don't worry about that.
I feel a lot of the time those things not necessarily come from personal experiences. It's almost like that pop culture mentality. You see it on TV, you see it on various crime shows, and it sort of gets ingrained in our culture. Society isn't accepting of it, but at the same time, there's very little sign that says it's not.
Yes.
But it's enough to make you second guess.
Like you say, doctors have a Hippocratic Oath, and I have respected all of the professionalism in the people and some of them are people of faith that I've dealt with over the years with this. But in that moment of vulnerability, I wasn't taking a chance. Another story that I have, my day slave job, to quote Moore, author Christopher Moore. My day's life job is working in a hospital, just a clerk, right? I'm just a work clerk, and I'm in the emergency department. And this is a few years ago. I'm working away at my desk at an emergency department, and there's a big open work area behind me with healthcare professionals and 2 residents. They are doctors. They still have the training list, right? And they come down from the floor for a very sick child and get the orders prepared, assess, and get the orders prepared for the child to go upstairs. While they're finishing up that work, they're having a chat between the 2 of them about somebody else on the floor upstairs. And they make reference to the fact that they were about to let this child go home, but the family came in and maybe had like a sacred smoke type ceremony, and they had some rocks, some crystals. There was some ritualistic words spoken. What all came out of that is this was just happening as they were kind of leaving, and they had been thinking about discharging that child the next day or whatever. And they said, well, we've contacted social work because we have a few concerns coming from a sacred smoke ceremony and healing ritualistic words said over crystals, etc. And I am sitting at my desk and I'm thinking, they don't pay you for any of this. They pay you to fill out paperwork. They pay you to take care of patient charts. Close your ears, put your head down, get your work done. You know, there's patient confidentiality. I don't even know who this family is to possibly reach out for them and advocate for them because I wouldn't know who they were. And I can't go up on the floor and knock door to door and sniff out juniper smoke or whatever, you know. So I'd have to say, quite literally horrified.
No, I would be too.
That's astonishing.
You know, I was like, I don't even know what to do with that. And as I look back, I think possibly I could have called the spiritual care person in the hospital and said, I overheard this conversation. I have concerns for these reasons. And it's really interesting. I spoke to my father about this, and he said, they've gone through medical school. Things are black and white possibly to these people. If it's not scientific, then it causes concern. They wonder what other, if you have quotation marks, magical beliefs, you know, what other poor decision making. And I said, Dad, they would not do that if that was a First Nations family. They would not have, they're very supportive. They would have got them something to put their smudge stick in, you know, all of those sorts of things. And he says, but they're racist. I'm like, what do you mean? They wouldn't have done it for a First Nations. And he says to me, and I think it's true, there's this systemic racism in the sense that if you're of another culture and you're doing a Shinto healing practice in the room, or you're this or you're that, you see people come in and say, oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that whatever from their culture? But we are obviously people raised in a North American, very Cartesian world, you know, scientific based world. So we should know better. And if we don't,
Something wrong with us.
There's something wrong with us, and social services better check us out. Kids are safe to go home with them.
Right.
I had never thought of it that way, but it is a form of systemic racism to look at us as pagans and think of us as being, oh, you're just so foolish to believe in this enchanted world, but it's okay for other cultures. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, pretend the priest was there and they were doing the rosary or something like that.
There's no difference.
He's doing the rosary. They wouldn't have looked
Holding
twice.
a string of stones, that rosary, and with an incense, they wouldn't have looked twice, but that's built into our Cartesian. They would have said, you know, that's a family traditional practice, but you're right. But for us, I was sick and I didn't do anything because I mulled around and I thought it's patient confidentiality. And you know, there was a part of me, and residents come and go and come and go. I didn't even want to turn around because I didn't want to see exactly who it was. Like, you know what I mean? I have to go into this place. I have to work. They obviously think I'm an absolute flake, or if they had known, they would have thought I was maybe, so they can't call social services. They might call, you know,
HR.
Resource.
or maybe have, you know, somebody check in on this old broad that maybe she can't take care of herself. She's just got these crazy ideas. I don't know. Anyway, it was an experience. And I had pretty much thought we had, you know, especially with the new younger millennials coming up, there seems to be a much more pluralistic, they're more open. I really see with this new generation a better, more socially just future. And I was shocked. There was 2 of them. It wasn't just one random person, but there was 2 of them, and they were belittling and mocking and literally saying that the family, they were nervous about the family.
Well, that's pretty sad to hear.
Yeah. So, yeesh.
Yeah.
So now how do you feel about disclosing now that I say that, right? Now that I tell you my terrible story.
I was going to say that it ties back to the first part of this conversation of disclosing, where you believe that you're in the trusted hands of professionals. But trusted hands of professionals, they're still human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although I know in previous times, if I've ever been at a merge or going in for surgery or anything on the intake form, when it came to the religion question, I always said other. But I think the last time I went in, I did say pagan, because I think I'm at an age where it's just like, I just don't even give a shit anymore.
Yeah.
You're just like me.
You know, before I was concerned about what people might think of me, or yes, might think I'm a flake or whatever. But now I figure I'm old enough, I'm confident enough, I'm sure enough of myself and my spiritual path that for me, I could write that. But I 100% understand, Gwen, how when it's somebody that's not you and somebody who is so important in your life, how you would want to protect that.
The unfortunate thing is the only real solution to this problem is more people need to speak up and say, I'm pagan.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was disclosed. Now, I haven't seen the physical paperwork yet, but apparently on the census, the Canadian census for 2021, it's going to have paganism, neo-pagan, Druidry, and Wicca.
Wow.
It's never listed Druidry or Wicca before.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting.
It has had neo-pagan in the past, but it gets 4 different options for it this time. So
that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that information. Like, I'm looking forward to what they do with that. Like, how many years are we going to have to wait for that part of the census to come back to us? I'm so excited.
I'm not sure which box I'm going to check.
A little column A, a little column B, eh?
Depends on what time of year it is, what kind of mood am I in?
So just a couple more questions. One was, are there religious, cultural / spiritual practices or supports that if you were in hospital, you would like, but you would feel uncomfortable asking for?
Well, a slight side to this question. A few years ago, Nova Scotia Health had reached out to the Grove about creating small spiritual kits for individuals who are in the hospital that may be looking for support if they identified as a Druid. So we had provided, I think 20 little kits. I don't know whatever happened to them. They got distributed amongst hospitals. And I guess if you go to a hospital and you might be on your deathbed or you're in there for any length of time, you can request one of our little altars that we created.
What was in these kits?
For the Druid one, there was an Awen symbol, a little bit of sage to burn. There was a little amount of moon water for a well. There was a little kind of like a fake tree because the tree wasn't going to live.
Yeah.
It was a candle for the fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that shows us a real willingness on the part of the hospital chaplain. They like to call themselves spiritual care now more than anything, but to try and meet those needs. You know, people are uncomfortable asking for anything because they think, they say, do we have any services? Can we help you with anything? And you're uncomfortable to ask because you think, I don't need to get into the conversation that's going to take this much energy out of me when I'm so low on energy. You feel like you have to educate your spiritual care provider about what you need. And I think of that as being one of the barriers, is that feeling that you have to. It's awesome that they have a kit because they could offer, say, we have spiritual care kits. Would you find that helpful? And I think probably a lot of people would. I was wondering too, sort of healing touch type modalities and stuff. You'd be afraid even to ask, for want of a better word, a Reiki practitioner or something like that to come in because you're thinking, are they going to be open? Do they think that's woo-woo and doesn't have place in a hospital? I was thinking about things like sage and stuff that you burn. You'd be afraid to ask for that possibly. And it wouldn't always work. Some rooms have oxygen going or whatever. It wouldn't be safe.
It would be interesting when you were talking about the little kits. It was burning in my mind, if you were, pagan or a Wiccan or a witch or whatever, you could have a seashell and a crystal and maybe a pine cone and a little candle. You know what I mean? I got that in my head.
I think that's awesome. I wonder where they are with those kits. Would they like more?
Happily help with that. That's neat.
To my understanding, they had reached out to a couple of different groups. Our job was to cover the Druid part. Yeah.
But nobody's touched base back with you. I wonder if nobody's followed up, if they did it and they've had a change of staffing or something, if they'd be interested.
It's something we'll look into with the assembly.
I think the Pagan Assembly being an umbrella organization, that might be a good spot for them to do something like that. I like Maeve a lot of those ideas, but is there anything else that you think people might ask for? I find the barriers are in our own heads. We're like, I can't deal with their reaction to that ask. So we stop ourselves before we even ask.
It would be nice to maybe have, even if they didn't have a Reiki practitioner, if you had some pagans or witches or something on staff, if they could say, somebody come maybe chant over you, or, or like rattle, drumming is loud.
Yeah.
To say, can you get somebody in here to some rattling or
that sort of shamanic sort of aspect of it. Yeah.
a little chanting with me, sing a song. I don't know. We sing a lot, right? A lot of singing, and sound therapy is a very good thing.
And I think just to have somebody available to come visit, to even just sit and talk, somebody you don't have to explain yourself to, whether or not they are pagan themselves, someone you don't have to educate.
On that note, and it's been discussed in the past, is end-of-life services for pagans in the hospital system, which I may be wrong, but currently is lacking. That conversation to be had with someone who may be facing the last moments of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can get last rites, you can get a priest, or I'm sure they have an imam or someone like that who would come in, or a rabbi who would be nice.
I think one of the things we think spiritual care practitioners, it says, what could spiritual care practitioners in a hospital do to provide support for pagan patients and families and to help foster a more inclusive and welcoming environment? A lot of it is that fear. We don't want to have to educate somebody when we're going through a crisis of our own, even if they come with the best of intentions. How do they communicate to us that, even if they have that knowledge and that willingness to make those connections or reach out to the pagans and bring somebody in for us or whatever, they have to be better at communicating that, because a lot of people self-select for other or self-select for unspecified or unknown or whatever, rather than take advantage of, services that are very beneficial when you're going through a crisis, whether it's your child that's going through something and you have to learn to deal with that, or spouse, or yourself.
Maybe like the census form, the identifying section in the intake form, is it Christian, Jewish, Muslim, other, or is it just a blank for you to fill in?
Yeah.
If it has specifics, if there's an actual checkbox for pagan, rather than forcing people to write it down, they might be more apt to check that box.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. I don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's entirely possible. I know through registration within the emergency department, the system that they use there, if they get to the point where they ask, what's your religion? And I mean, sometimes it's such an emergency, so you get the health card and the age and the specifics, you go right to it. But there is something close 40 possibilities.
Wow.
I forget what A is, but there's an A all the way to right through to Zoroastrianism.
Wow.
Druidry and Wicca, and I think pagan, generalized pagan, all rate a click. But we have different software than Nova Scotia Health. So I don't know what Nova Scotia Health has. And these people that I'll be speaking to tomorrow are in New Brunswick. If you make it easy, like you say, and they don't have to write in and it's easy, then spiritual care comes armed with that little bit of knowledge.
Yes.
That they can reassure people right at the get-go. I know this. Either I have somebody that would love to be able to chat with you, or I can take care of that myself.
Yeah.
Make it easy to identify.
Because that almost makes it more welcome to identify as well.
Yeah, you don't have to go out of your way to identify yourself. It's just there. It does make it easier.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very good. The last question is there anything that you wish all non-pagans knew or understood?
That we don't worship Satan.
So I was going to say that we're not devil worshippers.
Yeah, our primary one is like, not the Satan, please, not the Satan.
Literally has nothing to do with that whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised that you're two young doctors there that we're talking.
Mm-hmm.
As I was about to say, when we were talking about being nervous about identifying and all that, part of me was thinking, well, maybe that's just our age.
Mm-hmm.
Brian isn't, but we're 50 plus. And 25 years ago, we wouldn't have said that in a hospital.
No.
Now, you said you've experienced so much professionalism, people are more well informed.
Yes.
But then you tell the story about the doctors, and I'm thinking, okay, there goes that story done.
Yeah, it was such a shocking thing to overhear.
The other thing, too, is that we're not unintelligent flakes.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, this person's obviously a weirdo and we're going to have to, talk to them in a different way or something like that. It's like,
Maybe this is a conceit of my own, but I think when you're a non-traditional, a non-mainstream religion, whatever, you don't get there without work. So often for people who are in more mainstream religions, they grow up, it's a family thing. But if you're not growing up in a family, and I mean, now we have multi-generational, as we know, we've recently had our pagan parenting podcast, but I tend to think, and like I say, it could be a conceit of mine, that we are more educated about our religion. A lot of Christians don't know a history, or they know the basics of some stories, but they don't know them all. They know they should be a good person. They know the golden rule. They go to church on Sundays and they know a bit, but I often find that if you're choosing something out of the mainstream, out of the sort of normative box, you've done research, you've really looked into it, and then to be treated like you're an idiot, you don't know what you're thinking, and you're like, I think I probably know more about your religion.
That's the truth.
Not just foolish, but ignorant or uneducated or, all of those.
Flaky.
It's funny to think, like, paganism isn't even the most difficult spirituality for the healthcare system. There's lots of spiritualities out there that are very anti-science.
Yeah.
Paganism isn't one of them.
Yeah.
Oh, we're totally science.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me all the blood transfusions. Put them all in me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's for sure.
Absolutely true.
The heart transplant for my husband,
Yeah.
super grateful. And, here we have this traumatic case with all of these things with Dave. And I credit modern science for the fact that he's alive, but without that other complementary part of my spiritual faith practice and the healing circles that were held and the shamanic journey that was done on his behalf when he was in a coma that retrieved him from that coma, we could very well have a very different outcome. And so I definitely see how faith has a very important partnership with healing and science and medicine in healthcare. I think it has a really important part. But the fact that I have that shamanic healer on my side and I've had all these prayer circles and all those sorts of things praying for Dave, that doesn't take away from the fact that he's only alive because of science.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. The difference is you recognize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. If you're in a boat, you're on a river in a boat, and you're floating along with the current, you have to put the oar in the water to make you go even faster.
That's incredible, Maeve.
The modern medicine is you in the boat going with the current. But I mean, you can get that spirituality out and make it go a little faster and row a little harder, get it going.
So actually, that's something for your last question, is that sometimes there's a misconception that a lot of pagans don't believe science and magic work side by side, and they do. I don't know any pagans that don't believe in science.
The gods only go with you if you put yourself in their path. If you can get in that path and in that boat with science and your faith.
The great thing about polytheism is that I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find a god or a goddess that's all about heart transfusions or whatever. You'll find it. There's enough of them.
Mm-hmm.
There are gods and goddesses of medicine.
Yeah.
In the Greco-Roman, you have Apollo, who is the original doctor and brought medicine. The catechist comes from paganism and the symbols and all of these, so you can find, that to help with it.
Awesome. I appreciate this help with my homework. As you all know, I'm going to Cherry Hill Seminary. I have lots more homework. I may hit you guys up again, but this really is helpful because they really wanted a community view of things. And I think this is going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, you're very, very welcome.
Although, one thing too, I was thinking as we were discussing all of this, again, we are talking from a place of privilege where we have such a strong supportive community around us. Trying to think of these questions in terms of people who don't have that support system in place makes it difficult.
Of course, yeah.
To find yourself in a position where you need these services and not have a support system to help you is why it's so important, I think, for this education to be happening.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm really grateful to have been able to be part of it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because if I was in the hospital and ill, I wouldn't have to ask the hospital for help.
No.
Somebody would call 6 friends and everyone would be there. But it will be a lovely thing once they're able to provide those things for people who don't have that support system, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. It has been a lovely, lovely, lovely time. And if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly contact us on our Facebook group. And if you see any stars down there, give us 5 stars and a like. Until next time, everybody, merry meet.
Merry part. Blessed be.
This has been 3 Witches and a Druid podcast. Thanks for listening.